The black SUV rolled slowly through the narrow streets, its polished exterior looking completely out of place among the worn buildings and cracked sidewalks. Daniel pressed his face closer to the tinted window, watching the smoke curl up into the gray afternoon sky. His driver, an older man named Robert who had worked for the family for 15 years, glanced nervously in the rearview mirror. "Sir, I really think we should head to the office. You have that meeting with the board in an hour." Daniel didn't respond right away. Something about that smoke bothered him. This wasn't just a small fire. The column rising into the air was thick and dark, the kind that meant something serious had happened. And this neighborhood, he knew it. His company had just purchased several properties here last month. The plan was to renovate them, make them safer, better, but clearly they hadn't moved fast enough. "Pull over," Daniel said quietly. "Sir, the meeting." "Pull over, Robert." The car came to a stop near a chain-link fence. Daniel stepped out and immediately the smell hit him. Burned wood, melted plastic, and something else he couldn't quite name. Destruction, loss. He'd smelled it once before, years ago when his wife's hospital room had that antiseptic smell mixed with something final. Different circumstances, same feeling of things ending. He walked toward the fence, his Italian leather shoes crunching on broken glass and debris. The building that once stood here was now just a skeleton. Blackened beams reached toward the sky like burned fingers. The walls that remained were covered in soot, and you could see straight through to where people's lives used to be. A kitchen, bathroom, someone's bedroom, all exposed and ruined. That's when he saw her. At first he thought it was just a pile of clothes or trash, but then it moved. A small figure, hunched over in the middle of all that destruction, sitting right there in the ashes. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. Her dark hair was tangled and dirty, her clothes covered in gray dust. She was holding something close to her chest, and her whole body was shaking. Daniel looked around. Where were her parents? The firefighters? Anyone? The street was oddly quiet. A few people stood at a distance talking in hushed voices, but no one seemed to notice the child sitting alone in the ruins. He found a gap in the fence and carefully made his way through. The ground was still warm beneath his feet, and he had to watch every step to avoid twisted metal and broken glass. As he got closer, he could hear her crying. Not the loud, dramatic crying of a child throwing a tantrum. This was different. These were the quiet, hopeless sobs of someone who had lost everything and didn't know what to do about it. "Hey there," Daniel said softly, stopping a few feet away. He didn't want to scare her. The girl's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. Her face was streaked with tears that had cut clean paths through the soot on her cheeks. Those eyes, they looked too old for such a young face. He'd seen that look before, in the mirror years ago when he was her age and didn't know where his next meal would come from. "It's okay," he said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Daniel. What's yours?" She didn't answer, just stared at him with those big, scared eyes. He noticed she was clutching something, a piece of paper, or maybe a photograph. Whatever it was, she held it like it was the most precious thing in the world. Daniel looked down at his suit. It was probably worth more than most people made in a month, and here he was, about to kneel in ashes and rubble. He thought about what his assistant would say, what the board members would think. Then he thought about his own daughter, safe at home with her nanny, and what he'd want someone to do if she was ever alone and scared like this. He knelt down in the debris, not caring as the ash and soot stained his expensive pants. The girl watched him, still unsure, still holding that photograph like a lifeline. "I'm looking for something," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are you looking for? Maybe I can help." "I already found it." She looked down at the burned paper in her hands. "This was on the wall in our living room. It's the only picture I have of my dad." Daniel's chest tightened. He looked at the photograph more closely now. It was badly damaged, the edges completely burned away, the image warped from the heat. But he could still make out 2 figures, a man in uniform and a little girl, maybe a few years younger than she was now. That's you and your dad? She nodded, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. He died when I was 4. He was a firefighter. He saved people from fires. She let out a bitter little laugh that no child should be able to make. And now our house burned down. Isn't that weird? Daniel felt something crack inside his chest. 3 years ago, he'd lost his wife to cancer. He remembered his kids' faces at the funeral, trying to be brave, trying to understand why their mother was gone. He'd had money for the best doctors, the best care, everything, but money couldn't save her. And these people living in buildings that weren't up to code with landlords who didn't care, they didn't even have that chance. "Where's your mom?" he asked gently. "Hospital." She breathed in too much smoke trying to save our stuff. "The firefighter said I couldn't go with her in the ambulance. My neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, said she'd watch me, but I..." She trailed off, looking around at the destruction. "I had to come back. I had to find this picture. It's all I have left of him." "You came back here alone?" She nodded, looking guilty. "Mrs. Peterson fell asleep. She's really old," I snuck out. "I know I shouldn't have, but this picture..." Her voice broke. "Everything's gone. My toys, my clothes, my books. The blanket my grandma made me before she died. My mom's jewelry that she got from her mom. Everything. This picture is all that's left." Daniel sat down fully in the ash, crossing his legs like he was at a picnic instead of in the ruins of someone's life. "Can I tell you something?" She looked at him suspiciously but nodded. "When I was about your age, maybe a little older, I lived in a place kind of like this. Old building, too many people, not enough heat in the winter. We didn't have much. One day there was a fire in the building next to ours. We had to run out with just the clothes on our backs. I remember standing outside in my pajamas, watching the fire department work and thinking about all the stuff I'd lost. My comic books, my baseball cards, this little toy car my dad gave me before he left. Did you get your stuff back?" "No. It was all gone. And for a long time I was really angry about it, but you know what I figured out years later?" "What?" "The stuff didn't matter as much as I thought it did. What mattered was that my mom was okay, that we had each other. The memories I had of my dad didn't live in that toy car. They lived up here." He tapped his head. "And in here." He put his hand over his heart. The girl looked down at her photograph. "But this is the only way I can see his face. I was so little when he died. Sometimes I can't remember what he looked like without this picture." Daniel understood. After his wife died, he'd put pictures of her all over the house, terrified that his kids would forget her smile, her laugh, the way she looked at them. But over time, he realized something. The pictures helped, sure, but the real memories, the important ones, those lived in the stories they told, the traditions they kept, the way his daughter sometimes made the exact same expression his wife used to make. "Tell me about your dad," Daniel said. "What do you remember about him?" And slowly, carefully, the little girl started to talk. She told him about how her dad would make pancakes on Sunday mornings, always burning the first one and giving it to himself. How he'd let her ride on his shoulders and pretend she was flying. How he'd read her stories every night doing all the different voices. How he'd taught her to tie her shoes, and she'd gotten so frustrated that she'd cried, but he'd been patient and kind and told her she could do hard things. As she talked, her crying slowed. The fear in her eyes faded just a little bit. Daniel listened to every word, and with each story, he could see this man he'd never met. A good father, a hero, not just because he died saving others, but because of how he'd lived with his daughter. "He sounds like an amazing dad," Daniel said when she finally stopped talking. He was. She looked at the photograph again, but this time her expression was softer. "I miss him so much." "I know. I lost someone too. My wife, my kid's mom, and I miss her every single day." "Does it get easier?" Daniel thought about that. He could have lied, could have told her what adults usually tell kids. That time heals all wounds, that everything happens for a reason. All those empty phrases people say when they don't know what else to offer. But she deserved the truth. "It gets different," he said. "The hurt doesn't go away, not really. But you learn to carry it. And you know what helps? Having people around you who care. People who show up when things are hard. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression changed. Why are you here? You don't know me. Because when I saw you sitting here alone, I couldn't just walk away. Nobody should have to face something like this by themselves. They sat there together in the ashes for a few more minutes, neither one saying anything. Sometimes silence is its own kind of comfort. In the distance, Daniel could hear Robert on the phone, probably canceling his meetings, rearranging his whole afternoon. Good. Some things were more important than business. Finally, the girl stood up, carefully tucking the photograph into her pocket. The hospital room smelled like disinfectant and worry. Daniel stood near the door while the little girl rushed to her mother's bedside, carefully climbing onto the chair next to the bed. The woman lying there looked exhausted, an oxygen tube running under her nose, her dark hair spread across the white pillow. But when she saw her daughter, her whole face changed. Lily, oh baby, what are you doing here? Mrs. Peterson was supposed to... I'm sorry, Mama, I had to come back to the house. I had to find the house? Her mother tried to sit up, wincing with the effort. You went back there? Lily, it's not safe. The whole building could... I'm okay, Mama, really, and look. Lily pulled out the burned photograph. I found it. I found Daddy's picture. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She pulled Lily into a gentle hug, careful of the IV in her arm. Oh, Mija, you scared me so much. Daniel cleared his throat softly, feeling like an intruder on this private moment. The mother's eyes darted to him, suddenly suspicious. He recognized that look. It was the same one every parent gets when a stranger appears near their child. Who are you? Her voice was sharp despite her obvious exhaustion. My name is Daniel. I found Lily at the building site. She was alone, so I thought I should make sure she got somewhere safe. I hope that's okay. The mother's expression softened, but only slightly. Thank you for bringing her here. I'm Isabel, and I'm sorry if she caused you any trouble. No trouble at all. Daniel moved a bit closer, but still kept his distance. He knew how this looked. A man in an expensive suit suddenly appearing in their lives. I was in the neighborhood when I saw the smoke. My company owns the building, or owned it. I wanted to see what happened. Isabel's expression changed completely. The softness vanished, replaced by something harder. You own the building, it wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Daniel felt the weight of those words. Suddenly, he wasn't the kind stranger who'd helped her daughter. He was the landlord, the person responsible. The company I run purchased several properties in that area last month. We were planning renovations, updating the electrical systems, making everything safer. But clearly we didn't move fast enough. Clearly. Isabel's voice was cold. Do you know what the fire inspector told me? The wiring in that building was from the 1960s. 60 years old. They're amazed the whole block didn't go up in flames. Daniel felt sick. He'd known the properties needed work. That's why they'd bought them. But he'd let his team handle the details, trusted them to prioritize safety. Obviously, that had been a mistake. A potentially deadly mistake. I'm so sorry, he said, and he meant it. There's no excuse for what happened. The building should have been safer. You and Lily shouldn't have lost your home. Isabel looked at him for a long moment, like she was trying to figure out if he was being genuine or just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. Lily watched them both, her hand still holding her mother's. Pretty words don't give us back our home, Isabel finally said. Or replace everything we lost. You're right. They don't. Daniel took a breath. But I'd like to help. I know that probably sounds like charity. Isabel cut him off. Like you want to throw some money at us so you feel better about yourself? The words stung, partly because they were close to true. Not entirely, but close enough. Daniel thought about how to respond. He could get defensive, explain that he had money and why shouldn't he use it to help. Or he could be honest. I lost my wife 3 years ago, he said quietly. Cancer. We had every resource in the world. The best doctors, everything money could buy. And none of it mattered. She died anyway. My kids were 7 and 5. They had to learn what it meant to lose someone you love more than anything. And I had to learn how to be both a mother and father to them, which I'm still figuring out. Isabel's expression softened slightly. Lily looked up at him with those big eyes. The day it happened, Daniel continued, one of the nurses said something to me. She said, grief is just love with no place to go. I didn't understand it then. but lately I've been thinking about it a lot. All this money I have, all this success. What's it for if I can't use it to help people who need it? Not because it makes me feel good, but because it's the right thing to do. And what exactly do you think you can do? Isabel asked, but her tone was less sharp now. I don't know yet, but I want to find out. With your help. Not as some rich guy who swoops in and solves everything, but as someone who wants to actually fix what went wrong. Isabel studied him, clearly torn between pride and desperation. Daniel understood. When he was a kid, his mother had that same struggle. She'd worked 3 jobs and still sometimes couldn't make rent. When people offered help, she wanted to refuse to prove she could handle it herself. But sometimes accepting help was the braver choice. The medical bills, Isabel said slowly. The insurance from the building only covers some of it, and I don't know how long I'll be out of work. I'm a waitress at 2 restaurants and I clean offices at night. Or I did. Now I can't exactly consider them paid, Daniel said. All of them. And your salary while you recover, I'll cover that too. I know. You don't want charity, but this isn't charity. This is me taking responsibility for a building that wasn't safe enough. You could sue me. You'd probably win. Instead, I'm asking you to let me help make this right. Lily tugged on her mother's hand. Mama, he's nice. He told me about his kids, and he sat with me in the ashes and didn't even care about his fancy suit getting dirty. Isabel looked at her daughter, then back at Daniel. He could see her fighting her pride, her independence, everything that had helped her survive as a single mother. But he could also see how tired she was, how scared. Okay, she said finally, but I don't want handouts. I want to work. As soon as I'm better, I want a job. A real job, not some made-up position because you feel guilty. Deal, Daniel said, relief flooding through him. Actually, I have a lot of community projects that need people who understand what it's like to live in these neighborhoods. People who know what actually helps and what's just rich people's ideas of helping. For the first time since he'd entered the room, Isabel smiled. It was small and cautious, but it was real. You mean you don't think putting in a juice bar and yoga studio is what every neighborhood needs? Daniel laughed. You'd be surprised how many of my colleagues think exactly that. Over the next hour, they talked. Daniel learned more about Isabel and Lily's life. How Isabel had come to this city 10 years ago, pregnant and alone, running from a family that had rejected her for getting involved with Lily's father. How she'd worked impossible hours to give Lily a stable life. How losing everything in the fire felt like being dragged back to square one after years of climbing. Lily fell asleep in the chair, her head on her mother's arm, the burned photograph still clutched in her hand. Isabel stroked her daughter's hair, and Daniel saw the same look he gave his own kids, that fierce, protective love that would burn down the world to keep them safe. She talks about her father a lot, Isabel said quietly, careful not to wake Lily. He died in a warehouse fire when she was 4. He ran back in to make sure everyone got out. They gave him a medal posthumously. I have it in a box somewhere. Had it in a box. I don't even know if it survived the fire. He was a hero. He was. Isabel's eyes were distant, and she remembers him like he was perfect. Which is good, I guess. She doesn't need to know that we fought sometimes or that he struggled with things. She can just remember him as Daddy who made funny pancakes and gave the best hugs. My kids do the same thing with their mom, Daniel admitted. They've made her into this perfect angel. And I let them, because what's the alternative? Tell them about the time she got so mad at me she threw a plate at my head? The fights we had about money when we were first married? They don't need that. They need the good memories. Exactly. Isabel looked at him with new understanding. You get it. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Through the window, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Daniel thought about his own kids probably finishing dinner with their nanny right now. He should call, let them know he'd be late. Can I ask you something? Isabel said suddenly. Of course. Why are you really doing this? And don't give me the PR answer. I've seen enough rich people doing charity for the cameras. What's the real reason? Daniel thought about how to answer. He could talk about guilt, about responsibility, about wanting to make a difference. But Isabel wanted the truth, so he gave it to her. When I was Lily's age, I lived in a neighborhood a lot like yours. My dad left when I was 6. My mom worked herself to exhaustion trying to keep us fed and housed. And I was angry all the time. Angry that we didn't have what other kids had. Angry that my clothes came from donation bins. Angry that I was one of those kids people felt sorry for. He paused, remembering. Then one day my mom got sick. Really sick. We didn't have insurance. A neighbor, Mrs. Chen, she saw us struggling, and she did something I didn't understand at the time. She didn't offer us money or charity. She offered my mom a job at her family's restaurant, gave her flexible hours so she could go to the doctor, rest when she needed to. Taught her how to cook, how to manage the books, treated her like she was valuable, not just some sad case to fix. What happened? Isabel was listening intently now, 3 weeks had passed since the fire, and Daniel's life had transformed in ways he never expected. His office, usually filled with charts and financial projections, now had blueprints spread across every surface. But these weren't plans for another shopping center or office building. These were designs for affordable housing, community centers, and safe spaces for families who'd lost everything. Isabel was being discharged from the hospital today, and Daniel had arranged temporary housing for her and Lily. Nothing fancy, just a clean, safe apartment in a better-maintained building nearby. He'd wanted to offer something bigger, but Isabel had been firm. She didn't want to feel like she was living in charity. She wanted to feel like she was standing on her own 2 feet, even if someone had given her a hand up. The real surprise came when Daniel told his own children about Lily and Isabel. He'd been nervous, unsure how to explain why he was spending so much time with this family they'd never met. But kids understood things in ways adults sometimes forgot. When he told them the story, sitting at dinner one evening, his daughter had put down her fork and looked at him with her mother's eyes. "Can we meet them?" she'd asked. "Can Lily come over?" "I don't know, sweetheart. They've been through a lot. They might need space. Or they might need friends," his son had added, "like when Mom died, and we needed people around us." So here they were, pulling up to Isabel and Lily's temporary apartment with his 2 kids bouncing excitedly in the back seat. Daniel was more nervous than he'd been in years. This felt more important than any business meeting, any deal he'd ever closed. Isabel answered the door looking healthier than when he'd last seen her. The dark circles under her eyes had faded, and she was moving without the pained slowness of someone struggling to breathe. Lily stood beside her, wearing clothes from donations but looking happier than she had surrounded by ashes. "You must be the famous kids I've heard about," Isabel said with a warm smile. Come in, come in." Daniel's daughter stepped forward first, never one to be shy. "I'm Natalie. I'm 10. And this is my brother Oliver. He's 7, but he acts like he's 5 sometimes." "Do not," Oliver protested, but he was grinning. Lily giggled, and just like that the ice was broken. Within minutes, the 3 kids were in Lily's small bedroom, talking about video games and school and everything else kids talked about. The adults sat in the modest living room, the sounds of children's laughter floating through the apartment. "They're good kids," Isabel observed, watching them through the doorway. "They have their moments," Daniel admitted. "But yeah, they are. Their mom would be proud of them. Tell me about her, if that's okay." Daniel found it was okay. He talked about his wife, about how they'd met in college when he was still scraping by, working 3 jobs while getting his degree. How she'd believed in him when he had nothing but ideas and determination. How she'd been his partner in everything, celebrating his successes and catching him when he fell. Isabel shared her own story too. About Lily's father, who'd been funny and brave and sometimes reckless. About how she'd loved him despite knowing he'd always choose to run into burning buildings instead of away from them. About the morning she got the news, standing in their tiny apartment with a 3-year-old asking why Daddy wasn't coming home. "It's strange," Isabel said, "how we both ended up here. Different paths, same place. Maybe that's why I couldn't walk away when I saw Lily," Daniel said. "Some part of me recognized that look, that feeling of the world falling apart around you." Over the following days, something unexpected happened. The family started spending more time together. Not because Daniel felt obligated or because Isabel felt she owed him something, but because the kids genuinely liked each other. Lily would come over after school, doing homework with Natalie at the big dining room table. Oliver taught her how to play his favorite video games. Isabel would pick them all up sometimes, taking them to the park or the library, giving Daniel's nanny a much-needed break, and slowly, carefully, Daniel started involving Isabel in his plans for the neighborhood. She joined him at meetings with contractors and architects, pointing out things they'd never have thought of. like making sure the laundry rooms had good lighting because many people would be using them at night after work, or including a community garden where families could grow vegetables. Cutting down on grocery costs. You see things I miss, Daniel told her one afternoon as they reviewed plans for the new building that would replace the one destroyed by fire. I lived it, Isabel said simply. I know what it's like to count pennies to make every dollar stretch as far as it can. These architects, they're good people, but they've never had to choose between buying food and paying the electric bill. Daniel pulled her into the project officially, putting her on payroll as a community consultant. Isabel had resisted at first, but he'd been firm. Her insights were valuable. She deserved to be paid for her expertise, not treated like she was just helping out. The kids noticed the change too. One evening, when both families were having dinner together at Daniel's house, Lily turned to her mother with a serious expression. Mama, are we rich now? The room went quiet. Isabel set down her fork carefully. No, baby. We're not rich, but we have a nice apartment, and you have a real job, and we get to have dinner at Daniel's big house. Having enough isn't the same as being rich, Isabel explained gently. Rich is having more than you need. We have what we need now, which is a blessing, but we're not rich, Natalie spoke up, surprising everyone. My dad says being rich isn't about money anyway. It's about having people who care about you. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He'd said that to his kids after their mother died, trying to help them understand that despite their wealth, they'd lost something money couldn't replace. Hearing Natalie repeat it now to Lily felt like closing some kind of circle. Your dad is a smart man, Isabel said, smiling at Daniel in a way that made him feel both proud and slightly embarrassed. As the weeks turned into a month, the community project gained momentum. Other families from the burned building were found and given temporary housing. Daniel hired several of them to help with the rebuilding, providing jobs and dignity along with assistance. The media started catching wind of what was happening, but Daniel kept his promise to Isabel. He did interviews, sure, but he never mentioned specific families. This wasn't about getting credit. It was about actually fixing things. But the real change was happening in quieter ways. Natalie started inviting Lily to her birthday party, refusing to have it at some expensive venue, and instead wanting a simple party at home where all the kids from both neighborhoods could come. Oliver started saving his allowance, telling his dad he wanted to donate it to help families like Lily's. And Lily, who'd been having nightmares about the fire, started sleeping better. The trauma didn't disappear, but she was working with a therapist Daniel connected her with, someone who specialized in childhood trauma and grief. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel took all 3 kids to visit the construction site. The foundation for the new building was laid, and the framing was going up. It would be months before it was finished, but you could start to see what it would become. This is where our old apartment was, Lily said, pointing to a specific spot. She didn't sound sad, just thoughtful. Right there. That was my bedroom window. And now it's going to be someone else's home, Daniel said. A safe home with good wiring and smoke detectors and everything a family needs. Will we live here? Lily asked. Isabel, standing beside Daniel, answered. We could, if we want to. But we might choose somewhere else. We have options now, options. Such a simple word, but it meant everything. Having choices instead of just taking whatever life threw at you. Being able to decide instead of just surviving. I think, Lily said slowly, I'd like to live somewhere new, not here. This place makes me sad sometimes. That's okay, Isabel said, kneeling down to her daughter's level. We can find somewhere that makes you happy. Daniel watched them, mother and daughter, and felt that same sense of purpose he'd felt outside the hospital weeks ago. But it was deeper now, more complex. This wasn't just about helping someone in need. It was about family in all its weird, unexpected forms. That evening, back at Daniel's house, the kids were upstairs playing while the adults sat in the living room. Isabel was looking at job listings on her laptop. She was healed enough to work again, and while Daniel had offered to keep her on his team permanently, she wanted to explore her options. There's an opening at that nonprofit downtown, she said, the one that helps immigrant families navigate housing systems. They need someone who speaks Spanish and understands the community. That sounds perfect for you, Daniel said. Better than working for me, honestly. You'd be amazing at that. You really think so? Isabel, you've helped reshape an entire housing project in a month. You've caught problems my architects missed. suggested solutions that would have never occurred to us, and connected with families in ways I couldn't. You don't need me to tell you you're capable. She smiled, but there was something uncertain in her eyes. Can I ask you something? And I want you to be honest. Always. What happens when the project is done? When the building is finished and everyone has homes again? Do we just go back to our separate lives? Daniel had been thinking about this cue. 2 months after the fire, everything seemed to be falling into place. The new housing project was ahead of schedule. Isabel had started her job at the nonprofit and was thriving, and the kids were inseparable. But Daniel should have known that life rarely stayed simple for long. It started with a phone call from his lawyer. The landlord who'd owned the building before Daniel's company purchased it was claiming he wasn't responsible for the fire. More than that, he was threatening to sue the families who'd lived there, claiming they'd caused the fire through negligence. It was absurd, cruel, and entirely legal if he could prove his case. Daniel sat in his office, the phone pressed to his ear, feeling his blood pressure rise. He can't do that. The fire inspector's report clearly states the wiring was decades old and not up to code. He's claiming the previous owners are responsible, not him, his lawyer explained. And technically, since your company now owns the property, he's trying to shift liability to you. Let him. We'll fight it. Daniel, fighting this could take years and cost millions. Are you sure? I'm sure. These families have been through enough. I won't let him victimize them again. But the legal battle was just the beginning. 2 days later, Daniel's business partners called an emergency meeting. They sat around the conference table, looking uncomfortable and avoiding his eyes. We need to talk about this housing project, Richard, his oldest partner, said carefully. What about it? It's costing a lot of money. Money that could be going to our investors, our shareholders. We understand you want to help people, Daniel. That's admirable. But this is a business, not a charity. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. We can afford it, can we? Another partner chimed in. You've diverted resources, staff, and millions of dollars into this project. And for what? To rebuild housing that won't generate the returns we promised our investors. To do the right thing, Daniel said flatly. Remember that? When we started this company, we said we wanted to build things that mattered. Communities, not just buildings. We were younger then, more idealistic. This is the real world, Daniel. In the real world, you can't save everyone. The meeting went downhill from there. By the end, Daniel was faced with an ultimatum. Scale back the housing project, or his partners would vote to remove him from major decision-making roles in the company he'd founded. He left the office feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Was he being naive? Throwing away everything he'd built for people he'd only known a few months? His phone buzzed. A text from Isabel. Lily's school is having a parent-teacher conference tomorrow. Any chance you could come? She's been asking if you would. Daniel stared at the text for a long moment. This was exactly what his partners were talking about. He wasn't Lily's father. He had his own kids, his own responsibilities. Getting this involved with one family, letting them become so entangled in his life, maybe it was a mistake. But then he thought about Lily's face that first day, sitting in the ashes. He thought about his own kids, how much happier they'd been since Lily came into their lives. He thought about Isabel, who'd gone from barely surviving to thriving, and how much of that was because someone had simply shown up and cared. He texted back, I'll be there. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood in his daughter's doorway, watching her sleep peacefully. She looked so much like her mother. In the next room, his son was sprawled across his bed in that way kids sleep, taking up impossible amounts of space. They were okay. They had everything they needed. But were they happy? Really happy? Or were they just comfortable? Before his wife died, they'd talked about legacy, about what they wanted to leave behind. She'd always said that money was just paper, unless you did something meaningful with it. He'd agreed then, but after she died, he'd gotten lost in work and building the business and making more money, as if that could fill the hole her absence left. Meeting Isabel and Lily had woken something up in him, reminded him of who he'd wanted to be, not just who he'd become. The parent-teacher conference was the next afternoon. Daniel met Isabel at the school, both of them slightly overdressed compared to the other parents. Lily saw them coming down the hall and her face lit up like Christmas morning. You came, both of you. Wouldn't miss it, Daniel said, and meant it. The teacher, an older woman with kind eyes, smiled at them as they squeezed into the small chairs meant for kids. Lily has made remarkable progress this term. When she first started after the fire, she was withdrawn, having trouble concentrating. But something changed about a month ago. She started engaging more, participating in class, making friends. She's been through a lot, Isabel said. But she's stronger than she looks. She is. And she's lucky to have such a strong support system. The teacher looked at Daniel. Lily talks about you often. About your children, too. It's clear how much that friendship means to her. After the conference, Lily begged them to come to the playground behind the school. Please, just for a few minutes. They sat on a bench while Lily played on the swings, her laughter carrying across the playground. Isabel turned to Daniel with a concerned expression. You look tired. Is everything okay? He hadn't planned to tell her about the meeting with his partners or the legal threat from the old landlord. But sitting there, watching Lily play like any normal kid, the words came tumbling out. Isabel listened quietly, not interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So what are you going to do? I don't know, Daniel admitted. My partners aren't wrong. I have responsibilities to the company, to our investors. Maybe I have been too focused on this one project. Do you believe that? I don't know what I believe anymore. A few months ago, everything was clear. Business was business. Now it's all complicated. Life is complicated, Isabel said gently. That's what makes it real. You think I don't question things? Wonder if I'm making the right choices for Lily. Second guess every decision? You seem so certain all the time. I'm not. I'm terrified most of the time. Terrified I'm not enough, that I can't give her everything she needs, that I'll fail her somehow. Isabel paused, watching her daughter. But then I remember that doing my best is all I can do. And that sometimes the right choice isn't the easy one. What if my best isn't good enough? What if I lose the company trying to do the right thing? Then you lose it knowing you tried to be the person you wanted to be. Isn't that better than keeping it by compromising who you are? Daniel thought about that. He thought about his wife, who'd always pushed him to think bigger, to care more, to use their success to make a real difference. He thought about his kids and what kind of man he wanted them to see when they looked at him. I'm not backing down, he said finally. The housing project continues. If my partners can't accept that, then maybe we're not partners anymore. Isabel smiled. Good. Because I was about to lose respect for you if you gave up this easily. They both laughed, and some of the weight lifted from Daniel's shoulders. But he knew the real challenges were just beginning. The following week, things got worse. The story about the landlord's lawsuit hit the news. Suddenly, Daniel's housing project was being scrutinized. Critics called it a publicity stunt. Some accused him of exploiting the fire victims for good press. The comments online were brutal, picking apart every decision, questioning his motives. His partners used the negative publicity as ammunition, pushing harder for him to step back. Investors started calling, concerned about the company's direction. Daniel's phone rang constantly with people wanting statements, explanations, justifications. Through it all, Isabel remained steady. She showed up at his office one particularly rough day with coffee and sandwiches. You look like you haven't eaten in 2 days, she said, setting the food down on his desk. I don't have time to eat. I have 3 conference calls and 2 meetings, and you need to eat. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. She sat down across from him. Talk to me. What's the worst that can happen? I could lose the company. My partners could force me out. The housing project could fail. The lawsuit could drain resources meant for the families. Take your pick. Okay, and if all of that happens, then what? Daniel stared at her. Then I've failed, everyone. No. Then you'll figure out what comes next. You'll still have your kids. You'll still have people who care about you. You'll still be the same person who stopped his car and walked into the ashes to help a little girl he didn't know. That's not enough, isn't it? Daniel, you've already changed lives. Mine, Lily's. Every family in that building who now has hope instead of just despair. That doesn't disappear because some business deal goes wrong. You don't understand. This company is my wife's legacy too. We built it together. If I lose it, you honor her memory by being the man she fell in love with. The one who cared about more than just profit. The one who believed money was a tool, not a goal. Isabel leaned forward. She'd be proud of you right now. Even if it's messy and complicated and scary. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. He'd been holding it together for so long, trying to be strong for everyone, trying to make all the right decisions. But sitting there with Isabel, he let himself feel the fear and uncertainty he'd been pushing down. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "You don't have to do it alone. Let people help you. Let me help you. You've already done so much. I've done no." 6 months after Daniel found Lily in the ashes, everything came to a head on the same day. The morning started with a board meeting. Daniel walked into the conference room knowing this could be his last day with the company he'd built from nothing. His partners sat around the table, their expressions unreadable. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "We've reviewed the numbers," Richard began, sliding a folder across the table. "The housing project has cost us $12 million so far. That's $12 million that could have gone to our investors, our expansion plans, our bottom line." Daniel opened the folder, scanning the figures he already knew by heart. And we think it's time to cut our losses. Scale back the project significantly or abandon it altogether. "No," the word hung in the air. Several partners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Daniel, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. We made a commitment to those families. We're going to see it through." "At what cost?" another partner demanded. "Your reputation? The company's stability? Our investors' trust?" "At whatever cost it takes," Daniel said firmly. "When we started this company, we had a mission statement. Do you remember it? We wanted to build communities, not just buildings. We wanted to make a difference, not just a profit. When did we lose sight of that?" "We grew up," Richard said bluntly. "We became a real company with real responsibilities." "You can't save everyone, Daniel. At some point you have to choose between being a businessman and being a charity. Why can't I be both?" The question seemed to catch them off guard. Daniel stood up, looking each partner in the eye. "I'm not asking you to lose money. The project is expensive, yes, but it's also generating goodwill, community support, and real change. That has value too."
"Even if it's not immediately measurable on a spreadsheet. The shareholders don't care about goodwill," someone muttered. "Then maybe we need different shareholders." Daniel took a breath.
"I'm not abandoning this project. If you want to vote me out, go ahead. But I won't compromise on this." The room was silent. Then, surprisingly, Richard spoke up. "I don't want to vote you out, Daniel. You're the heart of this company. But we need assurances that you're not going to drive us into the ground chasing every good cause that crosses your path." "Fair enough. So let's restructure. Create a separate foundation for community projects funded by company profits. That way, the charitable work doesn't compete with business operations. We can do both." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a starting point. After 3 more hours of discussion, they reached an agreement. Daniel would keep control of the company, but with better oversight and clearer boundaries. The housing project would continue, but future community initiatives would go through proper channels and planning. He left the meeting exhausted but relieved. One crisis averted, but the day wasn't over yet. The old landlord's lawsuit was going to court that afternoon. Daniel met Isabel and several other families from the fire at the courthouse. They all looked nervous but determined. Lily was there too, sitting between her mother and Daniel's daughter, who'd insisted on coming to show support. The proceedings were technical and boring, full of legal language that made everyone's eyes glaze over. But the heart of the case was simple. Who was responsible for the fire and who should pay? The landlord's lawyer argued that the previous owners were responsible for the faulty wiring and that his client had been unaware of any issues. Daniel's lawyer countered with inspection reports, tenant complaints, and maintenance records showing years of neglect. Then Isabel was called to testify. She walked to the stand with her head held high, placing her hand on the Bible without hesitation. "Mrs. Rodriguez, how long did you live in the building that burned down?" 7 years. "And during that time, did you ever report problems with the electrical system?" "Multiple times. The lights would flicker. Outlets would spark. Once a small fire started in the wall, and we had to put it out ourselves because the landlord said it wasn't his problem." "What did the landlord say when you reported these issues?" "He said if we didn't like it, we could move. But where were we going to go? Everything else was too expensive or too far from my jobs. We needed a home, so we stayed and hoped nothing bad would happen." Her voice cracked slightly, but something bad did happen. The courtroom was quiet. Even the landlord's lawyer looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Rodriguez, can you tell us what you lost in the fire?" Isabel's testimony was powerful. She talked about the tangible things, clothes, furniture, her daughter's toys. But she also talked about the intangible losses, the sense of security, the feeling of having a place in the world, the photos and mementos that connected them to loved ones who'd passed away. My daughter lost the only picture of her father, Isabel said, tears streaming down her face now. He died saving people from a fire, and our home burned down because someone was too cheap to fix old wiring. It's not right. It's not fair. And it needs to stop. When she stepped down, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Other families testified too, each one adding their voice to the chorus of neglect and broken promises. Finally, the judge called a recess to review the evidence. Daniel, Isabel, and the families waited in the hallway, too nervous to talk much. Lily sat quietly, holding her mother's hand on one side and Natalie's on the other. After 2 hours that felt like days, they were called back. The judge looked stern as she reviewed her notes. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both sides, she began. And I find the preponderance of evidence shows a clear pattern of neglect and knowing disregard for tenant safety by the building's previous ownership and management. The landlord's face went pale. His lawyer started to object, but the judge held up her hand. The electrical system in that building was a disaster waiting to happen. Multiple complaints were filed and ignored. Inspections were dodged or falsified. And when tragedy finally struck, the landlord's first instinct was to blame the victims rather than take responsibility. She looked directly at the landlord. I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiffs. You will pay damages to each family affected by the fire, including medical costs, property replacement, and compensation for emotional distress. Additionally, I'm recommending criminal charges be filed for criminal negligence. The courtroom erupted. Families hugged each other, crying with relief. Isabel buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Daniel put an arm around her, feeling his own eyes well up. You did it, he said. You all did it. We did it together, Isabel corrected, looking up at him with a smile despite her tears. That evening, both families gathered at Daniel's house for what had become a weekly dinner tradition. But tonight felt different. Tonight was a celebration, not just of the court victory, but of everything they'd overcome together. The kids were running around the backyard, playing tag in the warm evening air. The adults sat on the patio, watching them and talking in that easy way people do when they've been through something difficult together. I got the job offer confirmed today, Isabel said, almost shyly. Director of Community Outreach at the nonprofit. It's a big step up from where I started. That's amazing. Daniel raised his glass. They're lucky to have you. I learned from the best, Isabel said, nodding at him. You taught me that helping people isn't about swooping in and saving them. It's about walking beside them, treating them with dignity and empowering them to save themselves. I think we taught each other, Daniel said. I was so lost before I met you and Lily. I had success, sure. Money, status, all of that. But I'd forgotten why any of it mattered. You reminded me. They sat quietly for a moment, watching their children play. Lily was in the middle, laughing as she dodged Oliver while Natalie chased after both of them. You couldn't tell which child came from which family. They were just kids being kids in a way that felt healing to watch. The new building opens next month, Daniel said. The families can start moving in. Are you going to the ribbon cutting? Only if you are, Isabel smiled. I wouldn't miss it. A month later, the day of the grand opening arrived. The new building stood where the old one had burned, but it was completely different. Modern, safe, beautiful, but not ostentatious. It had everything the community had asked for. Good lighting, secure entrances, a community room, a children's play area, and most importantly, electrical and safety systems that exceeded code requirements. Families gathered outside, some of them the same ones who'd lost their homes in the fire, others new residents who would benefit from what had been built. There were city officials, community leaders, and yes, some media. But Daniel had kept his promise. This wasn't about him. The focus was on the community, on the families, on what they'd all built together. Lily stood on a small platform holding a pair of oversized scissors. She'd been chosen to cut the ribbon, and she looked both nervous and proud in her new dress. I'm not really good at speeches, she began, her voice amplified by the microphone. But I wanted to say something. When my house burned down, I thought I'd lost everything, and I had lost a lot of things. But I found something too. She looked at Daniel, then at her mother, then at Natalie and Oliver standing in the crowd. I found out that family isn't just who you're born with. It's who shows up when things are bad. It's who sits with you in the ashes and doesn't leave. It's who fights for you when you can't fight for